All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, as many of you know, something I've been most concerned about since millions of Americans have begun to get vaccinated is what I believe is a deep and pervading sense that the public health establishment and many of their allies in the center left are counterintuitively contributing to anti-vax sentiment across America, and in some cases making the converse argument that vaccines actually don't work by insisting that onerous public health guidelines stay in place regardless of the level of herd immunity that's already been reached. The most egregious case of public health brain was the most recent pause on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The vaccine was paused by the CDC over 6 women under the age of 55 suffering blood clots sometime after they got the vaccine. As we said at the time, this was a disastrous decision, given that 6 million doses had been administered with literally zero problems for anyone else, and that given the prevalence of blood clots in the general population, especially amongst women on hormonal birth control, it wasn't even a major statistical event. The major reason that we called out the pause is because we knew, based upon evidence in Europe after a similar pause on AstraZeneca, that it would contribute to more vaccine hesitancy than any alleged problem with blood clots. And guess what? The CDC is back. They are set to announce Johnson & Johnson after review is perfectly safe. But you know what? The damage is totally done. The latest Washington Post poll on the subject found that less than 1/4 of Americans will even consider taking Johnson & Johnson. This is particularly disastrous for a few reasons. Number one is that among people who were vaccine hesitant, Johnson & Johnson was a great alternative. Many people who were hesitant to get the coronavirus vaccine were distrustful of mRNA technology, which is new. Johnson & Johnson relies on an older, more familiar formula. Also, you only have to get it once, with many vaccine-hesitant people reporting they simply just didn't want to get 2 shots. Now trust in that alternative is destroyed. Worse, Johnson & Johnson actually was a small percentage of the number of vaccines that were administered in America, but crucially, because of its one-dose status, we were disproportionately using it in underserved communities amongst poorer people. This is the worst mistake of the public health community so far. But it is typical. They look at things purely through a medical lens, but they forget that actual human beings are involved with a massive societal cost. Now, things wouldn't be so bad if we had a media that was willing to call out our public health establishment, but it's actually the opposite. Instead, media has embraced them fully while Trump was president as some sort of gotcha, and now they are parroting their ridiculous claims for post-vaccination life that, again, are going to dramatically contribute to vaccine hesitancy. Friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, he flagged this most recent phenomenon at the familiar faux NBC News, who ran this story, quote, "Even after being fully vaccinated, many wrestle with the fear of COVID." What? If you want to talk about anti-science, this is it. Already, if you're young, you're basically not at risk of death from COVID. If you're fully vaccinated, no matter what age you are, you will not die from COVID or even really be hospitalized, based upon the hundreds of millions of results that we have so far. And your chance of getting COVID is close to null if you get vaccinated. But this feeling doesn't come from nowhere. It's being pushed by people like Dr. Fauci, who refuse to loosen their rhetoric around public behavior, and it is being parroted by some of the dumbest people on television. Of course, I'm talking about Joy Reid when I use that phrase. Reid has been, in my view, one of the chief anti-vaxxers in media through her relentless pushing of the idea that your life shouldn't change at all after getting the vaccine, tweeting, quote, "I'm with Jonathan Capehart. I'm one vax done, but even when I get the second shot, I am too scared to be out there wilding. No flying and no indoor activity for me." Nope. Serious question. Isn't that just as anti-vax as people who don't want the vaccine? What Reid is saying is basically she doesn't believe vaccines work because she refuses to change her life. Thus, what was the entire point of getting a vaccine? This sort of center-left lunacy is probably foreign to many of you, but it's right here at home for Washington. In D.C., we have the highest level of mask wearing outside of this country. And anecdotally, I can tell you, even right now, with a huge portion of Americans vaccinated, appointments abounding within the city, everyone, and I mean everyone, is still even wearing a mask outside. Now, I'm hopeful that will change with the expected announcement from the CDC. Outdoor mask wearing is obviously theater, which we've known all along. But I'm telling it to you because you need to know that not just some people, but millions here on the East Coast and in some major West Coast cities are living their lives in similar fashion. What's worse is that these are the people that run the media. They run the government. They have disproportionate influence on all of our lives because they dominate all higher institutions of American life. If you want proof positive of such a person, take a look at this from Lori Garrett. Now, if you don't know who Lori Garrett is, she's literally a Pulitzer Prize winning health journalist who is a former fellow at the CFR. She's hugely influential in the public health community. Here she is saying that COVID cases are falling across the U.S., not because Americans are vaccinated, but because of mass and social distancing. Oh, really, genius? Then why, during mass and distancing, were we seeing massive spikes during fall and winter? As many people pointed out, 40% of Americans have already received at least one shot, which gives you, by itself, about 80% or so immunity, and that given antibodies and more, half of Americans are now functionally immune from COVID. It is anti-science, and it's crazy to claim otherwise. Anti-vaxxers and other people who have questions get a lot of heat in our media. But the people who deserve the most heat, in my opinion, are the public health officials who are failing at their jobs and media who is peddling irresponsible conspiracy theories about how your life won't change if you take the vaccine. Other public health people who seem intent on trying to prove that vaccines don't work, that's why we should all live in fear for the rest of our days, according to them. And to that, I really just say hell no, and I think most people should too. And I think it's very important, Crystal, as things rapidly come to a close. As we said, functionally half of Americans are now immune from COVID. CDC is set to announce today a revision of their outdoor mask guidelines. Even Dr. Fauci now saying, look, it doesn't actually work, and basically we can change the way that we all live. And you see people out there who are getting vaccinated, and this is being peddling, and they're held up on a pedestal as if they should want to continue their live life in fear. There's nothing to, especially if you get a vaccine, there's literally nothing to fear. And we know this. This is empirical. And yet they continue to peddle this stuff largely as a result of some bizarre culture war that resulted under Trump. And I'm not denying that Trump acted irresponsibly. Remember, what is it, almost past a year to the day? We're all supposed to hang out by Easter, right? What happened?
Easter, 2 years later.
I get how it happened, but it's been a year, okay? We can let go. You can throw your science rocks, signs away, and all of that. Trump is gone. You can restore your lunacy. But people haven't. It's not a joke. We live here in D.C. People are still double masking, walking outside across the street or from people who aren't wearing a mask. People are still afraid, and many of them are vaccinated. It just doesn't make any sense.
You told me, I haven't walked around that much because I don't live in the city. And so you had told me about these Fauci signs and whatever.
People are crazy.
I didn't totally believe you.
Come on up. I'll give you a tour.
The cult of Fauci is really something to behold. And there are people who, partly, I think it does originate with the Trump era and the way that everything became a political identity, including your adherence to public health guidelines became central to people's identities. So what I would say is, look, Joy Reid or anyone else.
She can do what she wants.
Do what you want. If you feel comfortable wearing a mask, I told you, I actually like wearing the mask because I like the anonymity. So if I can get away with that socially, I'm going to continue wearing masks in certain settings because I actually enjoy doing it. That's the choice that I'm making. But the problem comes in when you have a gigantic platform and you're spreading fear. That's really the thing. And this isn't just about coronavirus. This is about terrorism. This is about, all of these things that anytime you have a pundit who's telling you to be afraid, there's usually something in it self-interested for them. There's ratings in it for them. There's political power in it for them. So you should always be very skeptical. This is something that Maximilian said to us on the show last week. You should always be very skeptical of people who are pushing that. And then, because mask wearing and Fauci worshiping have become really central to this particular political identity, this sense that we can't change and we can't go back to normal, it contributes to a really damaging state of affairs where people who are reluctant or nervous about the vaccine and are even more so now that maybe the one that they were comfortable with, Johnson & Johnson, is taken off the table, they don't see any reason to get the vaccine because they see all these people are oh, we can't get back to normal. So look, I don't want to judge anybody. If you want to wear the mask, at this point, if you don't want to wear the mask outside, do what you want. But, don't go out there and spread fear and really what amounts to misinformation especially if you have a large political platform.
I think that that's the key point here. And, even Biden wearing a mask is the only leader of the G20 to wear a mask. And I know I sound like a boomer, but like these things are important. And it does reflect something to the rest of the country, which is that, no, like we can move on. There is an energy and most of the people do want to do so. If you want to wear a mask, go for it. If you want to stay inside for the rest of your life, I have no problem with that. But it really comes down to the enforcement of societal norms. And again, and people ask why I'm so obsessed with this topic. And it's because let's say that 8% more people get vaccinated. That, because of the way that you message it, that's millions of people, like millions and millions of people, millions more who have herd immunity, cascading effects of exponential growth, etc., whenever it comes to your ability to be normal and live your life. And that is why, look, there's 30% or so of the population that doesn't want to get vaccinated. That's fine. That's their choice. I wish they would choose otherwise, but it's not my place in order to tell them what to do. But there are a lot of people who are somewhere in that gray area.
Yeah.
That Johnson & Johnson story about all these underserved communities. I mean, also, who dies from COVID? It's them.
Yeah.
Most of us are healthy. Most of us, especially if you're young or if you're upper middle class, professional.
PMC's been pretty unscathed.
PMC, if you get COVID.
I don't want to say unscathed, but.
Not unscathed, but you're probably going to be fine, statistically. If you are poorer and you have health problems and more, you have lack of health care, haven't seen a doctor in 10 years, you're much more at
We
risk
know who it's hit
for
the
COVID.
hardest. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And by the way, I have to say, I think the other side of this is crazy too. I saw Tucker last night saying, call CPS.
I wasn't happy about that.
If you see kids, I know that you weren't.
Yeah.
If you see kids outside wearing masks, that is also a deeply anti-conservative idea. Usually conservatives have this idea of live and let live. People should be entitled to raise their kids the way that they want. So the judging at this point of the personal decisions people are making about safety for themselves and for their families should be left to themselves and not pushed on them by any personality.
I'll say this too about why I wasn't happy about that. Is because he's such a cultural lightning rod that whenever he says that, people are going to say, screw you and wear masks more.
I'm going to put the mask on my kid now.
I've tried to explain this to people at Fox before. I'm like, people hate you so much. They'll just do the opposite of what you say, even if it's ridiculous, just because they hate you. Nobody wants to listen to me, and that's fine. That's why I'm here and out there. But that's why I really wasn't happy about that. It's because it actually makes it more. It's like Trump. If Trump were to inject and be like, go after people wearing. More people in Calorama, which is near where I live, that is what they would do, specifically just to spite him. And so I just think people need to understand also the psychology of your opponent, where if Fauci's out there saying you don't have to wear masks anymore outside, that's a victory. Take it. You know? And I think we should go with that.
Don't demonize one another is the bottom line.
All right, I'm looking forward to your Radar Next, Crystal.